Exclusive contract with Feilu Novel Network Novel. Qing Dynasty. Starting from the top scorer in the exam, travel back to the 45th year of Qianlong. Liu Hao became the nephew of Liu Quan, the butler of Heshen. Sir, can I help you manage your 800 million silver property? Qianlong, it would be better if you, as an elderly person with 10 complete sets, had nothing at all. The Americas are the Americas of the Chinese people. The Peacock Dynasty has been an inseparable part of China since ancient times. In fact, Europe has also been an inseparable part of China since ancient times. Embark on industrialization, let China step onto the top of the world. Feilu Novel Network reminds you that this novel and its characters are purely fictional. If there are any similarities, they are purely coincidental and should not be imitated. Chapter 1. Clear through. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What's wrong with me? Where is this? Amidst a headache that was about to crack, Liu Hao gradually opened his eyes. After getting familiar with the long-lost light for a while, he struggled to lift his head. As far as he could see, it was an antique medium-sized room, with furniture and decorations such as coffee tables, chairs, and flower racks arranged in a clear Ming and Qing style. What is this place? Liu Hao first wondered. In his memory, he seemed to have been hit by a car, and then, was this a time travel? What's the situation? Liu Hao gritted his teeth and just sat up, couldn't help but speak up. Where are the people? Come on. Squeak. The carved door creaked open and a young man in his 20s walked in, holding a wooden plate with a medicine bowl on it. Upon closer inspection of the young man's attire, Liu Hao suddenly opened his mouth wide. Although this guy had a decent appearance, his demeanor was somewhat sleazy. What left Liu Hao stunned the most was that the young man in front of him even wore a braid with a money mouse tail. His entire head was bare, except for a small braid that was not much thicker than a mouse tail in the center of his head. Mr. Liu, are you awake? We are about to pay respects to Lord Heshen. You suddenly fainted, and I don't know what to do. The man looked at Liu Hao politely, his face still filled with humility. How ugly. Liu Hao roast in his heart. Then, he felt the chill of his forehead and unconsciously touched his forehead. Worry. Where is Laozi's hair? Shit. An ominous feeling suddenly rose in Liu Hao's heart. Mirror, mirror, quickly bring me the mirror. Liu Hao couldn't help but shout loudly. Mr. Liu, what's wrong with you? The young man looked surprised and hurriedly brought a bronze mirror. Liu Hao looked expressionlessly at himself in the mirror. In China, there were countless Qing palace dramas, and the characters in those dramas all wore big braids that only appeared in the mid to late Qing Dynasty. In the early and mid Qing Dynasty, the people wore real money rat tails. Shit. Liu Hao didn't know what to say anymore. Looking at himself in the mirror, he couldn't help but grit his teeth for a moment. Yes, I must have passed through, and I must have passed through the Qing Dynasty. At the thought of this, Liu Hao couldn't help complaining for a while. Others have traveled to the prosperous Tang Dynasty, or to the Ming Dynasty, or even to the level of the Three Kingdoms. It's better for oneself to travel to the Qing Dynasty, which has the ugliest hairstyle and the most severe ideological shackles. What year is this year? Liu Hao's gaze fell on the young man beside him. Mr. Liu, this year is the 45th year of the Qianlong reign, said the young man with a sly expression respectfully. The 45th year of the Qianlong reign. 1780 AD. Liu Hao suddenly felt the despair in his heart. Damn it, what era is this special code? It's not Kangxi or Yongzheng, but the 45th year of the Qianlong reign. At the peak of the Qing Dynasty. Pacify external threats and strengthen ideological control internally. At the peak of the Kangxi and Qianlong reigns, the cultural, political, and martial arts skills of the top 10 elderly people can be considered as their peak. It was also the last prosperous era of feudal dynasties. A prosperous era of hunger. Liu Hao thinks that if possible, he really wants to hit himself to death and see if he can continue his journey. "Mr. Liu, are you okay?" The servant touched Liu Hao's forehead and said, "Now that you have won the imperial examination, it's time for you to visit Lord He. With adults." Liu Hao squinted his eyes slightly and instinctively said, "Are you talking about Heshen?" The servant nodded and said, "Exactly." "Shit. Liu Hao doesn't know how many times he's yelling again tired. When did you get involved with this corrupt official from the Qing Dynasty?" Later, Liu Hao only felt a pain in his head, and then countless memories suddenly surfaced in his mind. Liu Hao, from Hangzhou, Jiangsu, Zhejiang. As for whether there was this person in history, Liu Hao doesn't know, but he knows that he has an uncle named Liu Quan. This Liu Quan is the butler of Heshen. Since childhood, Liu Hao has been familiar with the 4 books and 5 classics, and can be considered a prodigy in Hangzhou. He studied all the way. Not long ago, he passed the imperial examination in high school, and now he has passed the imperial examination in the capital. According to reason, Liu Hao is going to visit Heshen. Under the imperial examination system, regardless of the aristocratic family or the humble family, as long as they take the exam, they have equal opportunities to become officials. After becoming an official, those who go up can achieve their great ambition of governing the country and the people, while those who go down can improve their lives and compensate for their 10 years of hardship. To achieve the goal of passing the imperial examination and becoming a goal that ordinary scholars strive for. But whether or not one can pass the exam, and whether they can be reused, the examiner plays a significant role. The examiner can determine the ranking of the exam. In order to achieve their goals, candidates are required to present their works, including poetry and prose, to the nobles and nobles before the exam to pray for a good reputation. In order to gain the attention of the examiners, candidates naturally use various methods. However, for Liu Hao, there is no need for such trouble. He can visit Heshen directly. He can directly seek refuge with Heshen. This year, Heshen dealt with Li Shiyao, the Governor-General of Yunnan and Guizhou. Subsequently, Heshen was also promoted to the position of Minister of Revenue and walked in the office of the Minister of State. After the case was concluded, Li Shiyao was sentenced to be executed in prison. Shortly thereafter, Heshen was promoted to the position of Imperial Minister and replaced by the Blue Banner Manchurian commander. And this time, during the imperial examination, Heshen served as the head of the Hanlin Academy, and together with the head of the Hanlin Academy, Ji Huang, he was in charge of the Hanlin Academy. However, Ji Huang was old and weak, and his main affairs were mostly handled by Heshen. Heshen completely controlled the imperial examination system and recklessly accepted bribes from scholars, forming a high-priced get transaction. Heshen used this to monopolize the imperial court scholars. To become a successful candidate, he must first pass the examination of Heshen. If there were any problems, he would be expelled, causing the scholars in the late Qianlong period to leave the He Gate several times. With Liu Quan's relationship, Liu Hao can directly visit Heshen. However, even if Liu Quan was his uncle, he managed to earn a lot of money from his superiors and subordinates, which was why he fought for an opportunity to meet Heshen. In the future, he may also be the first to pass the imperial examination and honor his ancestors. Damn it! Even my uncle is such a prank. Liu Hao couldn't help but curse in his heart, lifted his eyes to look at the servant, and slowly spoke up, "I know." Just as he sat up, suddenly a voice echoed in Liu Hao's mind. "Host binding, the strongest rebellious system." System. Liu Hao's heart was filled with ecstasy. How did that sentence come to be? Wear it clean and don't rebel, chrysanthemum sleeve cylinder drill. Can one justify oneself without rebellion? Chapter 2. Lottery. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 3. What role do you have in the system? Liu Hao asked in his heart. This system is a rebellious system, giving the host a chance to draw a prize once a month. The mechanical sound of the system echoed in Liu Hao's ear, this system will also release some tasks from time to time. After completing the tasks, the system will give the host a certain reward. Done. Liu Hao asked in his heart. That's it, the system replied very simply. So, what is my current task? Liu Hao asked in his heart. Main task. Overthrow the current dynasty, establish a new dynasty, establish a stable political system, and the host can go to the next world. The system replied very simply. Overthrow the current dynasty, establish a new dynasty, and establish a new stable political system. Liu Hao muttered to himself for a moment, then couldn't help but say, I still want to go to the next world. If I don't want to go to the next world, can I stay in this world and enjoy prosperity? Of course, the system mechanically spoke, the host will live and die in this world, alternating between life and death, and heading to the next world. The host may be able to cultivate martial arts, take elixirs, and live forever. Liu Hao. Then I'll choose to travel. Compared to immortality, this monotonous enjoyment of worldly glory and wealth seems particularly boring. System task. Establish your own chassis or faction, and after completion, the system will receive rewards. The system still answered in a mechanical voice, the higher the difficulty of the task, the greater the reward you will receive. How does the reward I receive from the monthly lottery compare to the reward I receive from completing tasks? Liu Hao asked in his heart again. The rewards obtained from the monthly lottery are random, and there is a possibility of receiving high-level rewards as well as low-level rewards. The system mechanically said, overall, there are more low-level rewards and fewer high-level rewards, which are lower than the task rewards. Liu Hao understood and nodded slightly before slowly speaking, can I draw a lottery now? Sure. The mechanical sound of the system is transmitted. Lottery. Liu Hao thought for a moment and spoke directly. Ding dong. Congratulations to the host for winning the Patek Philippe 5327J in the lottery. Worry, can you also give me this future thing? Liu Hao couldn't help but start questioning in his heart. However, the system did not answer Liu Hao, and Liu Hao also instantly felt a heavy burden in his pocket, obviously because there was an extra Patek Philippe watch inside. Mr. Liu, Mr. Liu. The servant on the side couldn't help but speak up, how are you doing? I'm fine. Liu Hao suddenly regained his senses and glanced at the servant again. He quickly spoke up, you go out, I'll wash up and come out. Yes. The servant nodded slightly. He took the initiative to retreat. Liu Hao took a deep breath and then took out the Patek Philippe from his pocket. It has to be said that it is exceptionally exquisite. A new type of automatic winding perpetual calendar watch. This watch is equipped with a Calatrava case, exquisite scallop-shaped ears, and a 3-dimensional gemstone block. The gold and rose gold styles feature ivory white painted dial and recessed timer. The platinum style is paired with a blue sun glow pattern dial. All styles feature sapphire crystal transparent covers and interchangeable gold bottom covers. If placed in 200 years, it is guaranteed to make countless girls go crazy. However, this special code was 200 years ago. Really? Liu Hao didn't even know the purpose of the system giving him this useless thing. Wait. Liu Hao frowned slightly and said, what if we give this watch to Qianlong? In fact, Liu Hao's heart was also very clear. Although he had traveled through time and had a system, in reality, rebellion was still more difficult than reaching the sky. This is not the early years of Kangshi's reign, and there are still 3 domains, Aobai. The current Qing Dynasty ruled for 100 years, and if they wanted to rebel, their troops could not be mobilized. They had to wait until the rebellion, at least until the late Qianlong period when the White Lotus sect rebelled. If the method was not correct, it would still be easy to be extinguished. To rebel, one must integrate into the system of the Qing Dynasty, accumulate and cultivate one's own strength. Although it is still extremely difficult, it is relatively easier than directly pulling the team. Fortunately, the time I traveled was not during the youth and middle age of Emperor Qianlong. In his later years, Qianlong was truly greedy. Otherwise, it would be impossible for Heshen to rise up. It's Qianlong's birthday soon. On the emperor's birthday, the wave of tribute swept across the country. At this point, the entire empire becomes a world expo where officials of all sizes present tribute. According to the records of the Korean envoy, on his 70th birthday in the 45th year of the Qianlong reign, 1780, the tribute scenes he saw along the way in the Heavenly Dynasty were truly astonishing. Near the capital, there were as many as 30,000 large tribute carts from various places, according to incomplete statistics. Apart from large carts, there are countless precious and fragile tribute items that can be carried by people, camels, or sedans. Those who bear the burden with their poles are like delicate and soft clouds. Each carriage leads 6 or 7 horses and mules, and 4 mules are driven by sedan chairs or poles, with small yellow flags inserted on them, all inscribed with the words, "Tribute." In order to transport tribute, vehicles competed with each other, the fire and spring looked at each other, the bells moved the ground, and the whips shook the fields. Not impressive. Many people say that the rise of the trend of tribute was the key to opening the door to political corruption during the Qianlong dynasty. The emperor's excessive acceptance of tribute is itself a serious act of corruption. In the officialdom, it is common for people to give small gifts. If the value of the gift exceeds the limit, it is considered corrupt. Similarly, receiving tribute according to custom was a necessity for the emperor to maintain a normal life, but accepting gifts without restraint like the late Qianlong was certainly a crime. The theory of Emperor Qianlong was that gifts given to the emperor were made by officials themselves, that is, they paid out of their own pockets, with the purpose of connecting the emotions of the upper and lower levels. Why not do it because it will not increase the burden on the people and also communicate the personal feelings between monarchs and officials? In fact, even if you think with your fingertips, you can determine that it is impossible to make it yourself. The local specialties given to the emperor almost exceeded the capacity of the officials. The emperor liked the kind of jade inlaid with pearls, and his courtiers offered it one after another. At that time, a jade rui without inlaid beads was worth 4,000 taels of silver. At that time, the price of Lingnan pearls was about 4,000 to 5,000 taels of silver for a quarter heavy pearl, and 6,000 to 7,000 taels of gold for a fifth heavy pearl. For example, a large pearl weighing 3 taels like Longyan fruit was worth 20,000 taels of silver. The value of a lucky handle is so great that other gifts can be imagined. Wool comes from sheep, and each of these exquisite gifts is made from the blood of the people. Due to the prevalence of the tradition of offering tribute, the term helping tribute appeared in the officialdom during the Qianlong period, meaning that ministers with the power to offer tribute ordered their subordinates to help them purchase objects in order to show filial piety to the emperor. Because gifts given to the emperor, from procurement and preparation to delivery to the interior, often have an undisclosed process, unclear accounts, dense clouds, and numerous mechanisms. In fact, the 10,000 taels delivered to the emperor's hands may mean that the governors exploited 100,000 taels from state and county officials, while the state and county officials could have exploited 1 million taels from the people. Nowadays, among all the civil and military officials in the world, who can come up with a watch that is more precious than this one in my hand? Liu Hao suddenly laughed and said, "It's just right, it can be used as my promotion gift." Chapter 3. Farewell to Heshen. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shicheng District, Luyin Street. In 200 years, Hefu will become a national key cultural relic protection unit, a national first-class museum, and a national 5A level tourist attraction. It is the largest royal mansion architectural complex in the Qing Dynasty. The entire He Mansion can be considered the most luxurious building in the capital, second only to the Imperial Palace. The first half of the He Mansion is a magnificent mansion, while the second half is a deep and beautiful classical garden, covering a total area of nearly 60,000 square meters. The architecture of its mansion is solemn and dignified, simple and elegant, with clear corridors connecting the spine and a majestic appearance, second only to the imperial palace where the emperor resides. The Tsuejin garden behind the mansion is surrounded by water and mountains, with towering ancient trees, winding corridors, pavilions, making it magnificent and natural. The ever-changing scenery and graceful opening and closing during this period are truly a model of Chinese garden architecture. According to existing literature records, in this area located on the west bank of the Qianhai Sea in the capital, surrounded by the Panlong water, on the land of Feng Shui treasure, there was a grand temple during the Yuan and Ming dynasties, with a thriving incense fire and a plethora of visitors. Even the emperor came here to pay homage to the Buddha and offer incense. Around the mid-16th century, the temple gradually became abandoned and became a supply factory for the Ming court. After the Qing Dynasty took control of the capital, several courtyards of varying sizes were built here to accommodate ordinary flag people such as the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Around the 40 years of the Qianlong reign, Heshen, who was extremely red in front of the emperor, fell in love with this Feng Shui treasure land surrounded by water, connected to the western mountains, and not far from the emperor's house. He then purchased several properties here at a high price and built the famous Hedi. The identity of Liu Quan's nephew is still more useful, and Liu Hao has not suffered much hardship. In front of the Prime Minister's gate is the 7th rank. This statement is still very reasonable. Although Liu Quan does not hold any official position, his identity as the housekeeper of Heshen is still enough to make countless bureaucratic collectives across the country kneel down. Liu Hao is not allowed to leave the gate of the He mansion, he can only go through the side door. "Nephew, you're here." Just as he walked in, Liu Hao heard a familiar voice in his memory. "Nephew Liu Hao, pay respects to uncle." Liu Hao quickly bowed, although he was not satisfied with the many complicated customs and traditions of the Qing dynasty. However, Liu Hao was well aware that in order to survive in this era, he must follow the rules of this era. Later, Liu Hao looked up. This Liu Quan is different from the Liu Quan in movies and TV dramas. Firstly, he has very little hair and is nicknamed Liu Tuzi, the butler of Heshen. At this moment, Liu Quan was almost 50 years old. Although he did not hold any official position, he had a sense of pampering himself. In the 24th year of the Qianlong reign, Heshen, his younger brother, and Lin were both admitted to the official school of Xianan Palace. That same year, Heshen's father, Chang Bao, passed away and took office in Fujian. In order to continue his studies, Heshen had to borrow money from his father's former friends and colleagues for living and study expenses. During the process of borrowing from Heshen, Liu Quan stayed by his side, following Heshen back and forth time and time again, enjoying a closed door. At that time, Liu Quan's unwavering loyalty as a domestic slave was evident in the situation where people were walking away from tea. This also laid the groundwork for the future trust of Heshen in Liu Quan. As the saying goes, one person is wise, and the rooster and the dog ascend to heaven. Because Liu Quan, the virtuous of Heshen, also became the top nouveau riche in the capital. At that time, Liu Quan owned more than 100 houses, including pawn shops, pharmacies, several accounting offices, and over 10,000 taels of silver. Liu Quan, in order to show off his wealth and status, is extremely extravagant in his life, and even shows extravagance and waste beyond his level. When Heshen fell, he was imprisoned at the same time as Heshen and was declared the first culprit of Heshen's 20 major crimes by Emperor Jiaqing. After committing suicide, Heshen was sentenced to exile to Heilong River. Of course, at this moment when Liu Quan was still at his peak, with the favor of Emperor Qianlong and the protection of Emperor Heshen, Liu Quan's identity was naturally extremely prestigious. Liu Quan chuckled and casually sat on the chair, saying, "Liu Hao, I didn't expect that our Liu family also had a scholar, and now they are also masters of the imperial examination." Uncle jokingly, "If it weren't for uncle taking care of it, how could my nephew become a juren?" Liu Hao smiled slightly and then slowly spoke up, "In the future, it's still necessary for uncle to carry one or two." Liu Quan brewed a pot of tea and sipped it slowly, nodding his head and saying, we have already told Mr. He that rest assured, our old Liu family should also have someone who studies and becomes an official. Alright, come with me to meet Mr. He. This year's main exam is with Mr. He. Now that you have passed the Imperial examination and won the Huiyuan, you must go to the palace examination, and Mr. He must give you some guidance. Liu Hao muttered to himself, cursing the neighbor. You bastard, you're asking me for money. Dear uncle, do you need me to pay you for your special code? Although he cursed incessantly in his heart, Liu Hao restrained himself and did not speak. Instead, he bowed slightly and politely said, Thank you, uncle. Liu Quan chuckled but was not in a hurry. He glanced at the clock in the room and said, There's no need to worry. I'm still on duty with adults, sit down. Upon hearing this, Liu Hao sat down and looked curiously at the clock in the corner of the room. During the Qing Dynasty, there were already clocks and watches. An artistic timer powered by machinery, with precious materials as the casing and complex construction. Huaxia was originally the country with the earliest invention of timers in the world. But since Italian missionary Matteo Ricci presented the first self-ringing bell to Emperor Wanli of the Ming Dynasty in 1601, Western clocks have been presented to the court one after another. Emperor Kangxi of the Qing Dynasty attached great importance to Western clocks as a new science, storing Western clocks, also known as self-ringing clocks, at the southern end of the Duan-Ning Hall and naming this place as the self-ringing clock office. He also established a clock-making office in the palace. By the time of Emperor Qianlong, clocks had become an indispensable part of the lives of emperors and empresses. They were not only displayed in various palaces, but also on cars, sedans, boats, and saddles for outings. Therefore, a large number of novel clocks are used every year. There are thousands of 18th and 19th century clocks in the Qing palace. At that time, the production quantity of each type of clock was extremely small, with some producing only 1 or 2 pieces. Coupled with the exquisite materials and craftsmanship, these clocks became artistic timepieces. After 1840, imperialism burned and plundered several times, resulting in heavy losses. The existing clocks and watches in the Palace Museum are no longer from the Kangxi and Yongjing periods, only a portion from the Qianlong period remains. The Qing Dynasty is garbage, and the Eight-Nation Alliance is not a good thing either. It was estimated that the time had come when Liu Quan led Liu Hao into the main entrance of the mansion. Liu Hao followed behind Liu Quan, being cautious. And Liu Quan waited at the door for a long time, until a sedan chair appeared at the entrance of the He mansion. Liu Quan then greeted him with a flattering smile on his face, Master, you're back. On the sedan chair, a man walked down, looking slightly overweight, but there were still some with clear eyebrows and beautiful eyes. It was none other than Heshen. Chapter 4. Gifts to Heshen. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Unlike the chubby guy in TV dramas, he just slightly gained weight. At this moment, Heshen looked clear and handsome. Apart from having an ugly braid, this guy still looked very handsome. It is said that when Emperor Qianlong was still a prince, for some unknown reason, when he entered the palace, he met the young and beautiful Empress Dowager at that time. It is said that Qianlong was originally a passionate, charming and elegant man. He was shocked by the beauty of Nian Guifei and wanted to flirt with her. So he secretly ran over and covered the eyes of Empress Nian with his hands. Nian Guifei didn't know who the blindfolded person was. She thought it was some palace maid playing with her, so she waved her comb backwards. As her arm was about to touch Hongli's forehead, Hongli quickly reached out and grabbed Nian Guifei's arm. The noble consort turned around and saw that it was Qianlong, so she fell into the arms of Hongli. In ancient times, there was a mismatch between men and women, and such behavior was still among two people with very inappropriate identities. It is easy to imagine how unconventional it was. And this inappropriate scene happened to be seen by Hongli's birth mother, who was afraid that the news would affect Hongli's reputation and would be detrimental to inheriting the throne. So, carrying Yongzheng's warning, she gave the young noble consort 3 feet of white silk to commit suicide. When Hongli heard the news and arrived, consort Nian had already passed away. With great sorrow in her heart, she said, "I hurt you. I hurt you." At this moment, the close maid of Empress Dowager Nian told Hongli, before Empress Dowager Nian hanged herself, she entrusted her maid to convey to the prince a message. "I will meet you on earth in 20 years. After learning about it, Hongli was even saddened and looked at the deceased Empress Nian, saying, "Empress Nian, if we really have fate, we will meet in 20 years, if we cannot meet in this life, we will definitely meet in the next life. Remember this when we meet." Then he bit through his own finger and struck a cinnabar on the forehead of the noblewoman. When Hongli first saw Heshen 20 years later, he realized that Heshen and Nian Guifei had very similar appearances, and the cinnabar on his forehead was also there. Ask Ho Shen if there are any sisters at home. But found out that there were only men at home. After casually asking about his age, he was surprised to find that Heshen was born in the same year as the death of Empress Dowager Nian. And upon closer inspection of the red mark, it was discovered that it was identical to the cinnabar he had placed on the head of Empress Dowager Nian. Therefore, it was determined that Heshen was the reincarnation of Empress Nian. Coupled with that unfinished marriage, Heshen was greatly favored. Of course, this statement is somewhat nonsensical. If Qianlong dared to slap Yongzheng's woman, he really didn't know what to do. However, even so, in the late Qianlong period, Heshen was still highly valued. The reason, of course, is that Heshen's unique technique of accumulating wealth helped Qianlong quickly expand the Internal Affairs Office, allowing him to live a life of extreme poverty and luxury in his later years. There was a rule in the Qing Dynasty that no additional taxes would be imposed. This is a lesson learned from the Ming Dynasty's downfall. Therefore, since the Kangxi period, the taxes on farmland have not increased, and the same goes for Qianlong, who never increased taxes when cultivating wasteland. Qianlong boasted of being a perfect old man, saying that if he didn't add taxes, he wouldn't add taxes. This was to gild his own face, but it was to accumulate wealth from other places. If he didn't add taxes, the civil and military officials of the Qing dynasty naturally had a way to plunder the wealth of the people. Heshen was naturally one of the leaders, the first person to lead the way in bribing the emperor. At this moment, Heshen looks in a good mood. "Quaner, who is he?" Soon Heshen noticed Liu Hao. Liu Hao pays his respects to He Zhongtang. Liu Hao bowed deeply, and Heshen's gaze also fell on Liu Quan beside him, inquiring about Liu Hao's identity. "Master, this is my nephew." Liu Quan pointed at Liu Hao and said, "This year's imperial examination, Liu Hao passed the Huiyuan exam. Today, he came to visit Master." "Oh." Heshen's gaze slightly changed as he looked at Liu Hao. If it were an ordinary scholar, he would naturally not take it to heart. However, Liu Hao's identity is different. Although Liu Quan was said to be the butler of Heshen, in reality, the relationship between the master and servant was excellent. After Heshen's father Changbao died, Liu Quan protected Heshen and Helen, who were still young at the time, accompanied him and went around borrowing money together. Until Heshen was 15 years old and had the ability to stand on his own, he drove his stepmother out of the house and became the butler of the Hefu. At the age of 18, Feng married into the Hefu and called him the butler. However, Heshen believed that there were only 2 maids in the family, and calling him the butler was not appropriate. He then called Feng the Quaner and continued to practice until Feng's death. This is treating Liu Quan as someone from his own family, and when he meets Liu Hao, he inevitably needs to be enthusiastic. "Liu Hao." Heshen muttered for a moment, then smiled and said, good name, Jinka Huiyuan, not bad, not bad." In the palace examination, it is called the Jia Bang. Those who pass the second round of the imperial examination and then pass the first round of the imperial examination to become officials are called those from the second round. A person who possesses the abilities of Jia Yuan, Hui Yuan, and top scorer is called Lian Zhong San Yuan. In both the Ming and Qing dynasties, there were several people who achieved the 3 Yuan system. As a member of his own family, and having won the Hui Yuan, Heshen naturally wants to give Liu Hao a high regard. Subsequently, Liu Hao followed Heshen into the inner palace. Liu Hao, when you come to my mansion, you should treat yourself as your own family, no need to be polite. Heshen sat on the chair, but his face showed a smile. I heard Liu Quan talk about you earlier, and you are already Jiayuan. Now you have one Huiyuan again. After reaching the top tier, you will inevitably be from the second tier. In the future, you will become an official, but you must be loyal to the emperor with all your heart and soul. Be loyal to your mother's size, I will rebel. I thought to myself, but Liu Hao's face did not show any unnecessary emotional changes. He lowered his head slightly and politely said, it's exactly what you said. Yes, I have a gift to give to Lord He when I visit him today. Heshen nodded slightly and secretly said that Liu Hao had indeed taken the path. The current Qing Dynasty, under the control of Heshen, had already developed a dragon of corruption. From top to bottom, almost everyone was greedy, and occasionally a few were difficult to turn the tide. If you want to do something, you must show filial piety to the higher-ups. Otherwise, you will be excluded. Liu Hao took the road so quickly, which naturally made Heshen very satisfied. The corner of his eye couldn't help but glance at Liu Quan. It seemed that Liu Quan had trained well. At this moment, Liu Hao took out his packaging box for Patek Philippe. When he saw such a small box, Heshen frowned slightly. The box is small, it seems that 9 out of 10 things inside are not very precious. However, when the box fell into his hand, Heshen was surprised. The packaging looked a bit exquisite. Liu Hao smiled slightly and said, with adults, why don't you open it and take a look? Chapter 5. The Shock of Heshen. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Heshen frowned slightly. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't open it. It's not a heavy gift, and Heshen really doesn't take it seriously. However, since Liu Hao said so, Heshen couldn't refuse and casually opened the box in his hand. Hush! Heshen couldn't help but take a cold breath. Is there a clock in this box? This is also too exquisite. After all, this is the latest Patek Philippe from 2020. A new type of automatic winding perpetual calendar watch. This watch is equipped with a Calatrava case, exquisite scallop-shaped ears, and a 3-dimensional gemstone block. The gold and rose gold styles feature ivory white painted dial and recessed timer. The platinum style is paired with a blue sun glow pattern dial. All styles feature sapphire crystal transparent covers and interchangeable gold bottom covers. Even in 2020, it was worth millions of soft coins, which is absolutely ahead of its time. Heshen no longer knows how to describe his inner self. This thing is too valuable. On one side, Liu Quan couldn't help but take a cold breath. The technology of watches has never appeared in this era. The world's first watch was manufactured by Patek Philippe in 1868 for Countess Koskowicz of Hungary. But this form of clock was not popular at that time. In 1904, Louis Francois Cartier, a French businessman who sold jewelry, received a complaint from his friend Alberto Santos Dumont, a pilot, stating that it was very difficult to remove a pocket watch from his pocket while piloting a plane. He hoped that he could help solve the problem so that time could also be seen during the flight. Therefore, Cartier came up with the method of tying the pocket watch to his hand with a belt and buckle to solve his friend's problem. And this kind of pocket watch tied to the hand is today's watch. However, in this era, it is definitely ahead of time. Especially, this design Heshen never knew how many rare treasures he had seen in his life, but he swore that he had never seen such treasures before. No wonder Liu Hao asked himself to open it. Emotions, this is a true treasure. This Heshen picked up Patek Philippe and carefully examined it. Although there were already clocks in this era, watches had never appeared in this era. However, in the Qing Dynasty, pocket watches already existed. The prototype of this watch was first designed by Emperor Kangxi in 1710 and was designated as a birthday gift to his mother, Empress Dowager Xiaowei. This watch is made of gold and jade, engraved with dragons and phoenixes presenting auspiciousness, embodying the elements of yin and yang. Unfortunately, it was still destroyed by the foreign devils. The Patek Philippe in Liu Hao's hand is a fusion of the most powerful industrial technology of the 21st century. After extremely meticulous polishing, it is naturally different from ordinary watches. Just a glance gave Heshen a feeling of being unable to put it down. Good thing, good thing. Heshen put down Patek Philippe and couldn't help but speak up as he looked at Liu Hao. Liu Hao, you really gave me a lot of surprises. Liu Hao just smiled and said, as long as you like adults, it's just. At this point, Liu Hao paused slightly and then spoke up. Liu Hao is brave. He has a question, but he wants to ask Lord He for some advice. Heshen slightly restrained his gaze and then slowly spoke, but it doesn't matter. Are you planning to keep this watch for yourself, or are you planning to dedicate it to the emperor? Liu Hao spoke cautiously, Your Excellency, this watch is worth a lot. Liu Hao believes that there is only one piece in heaven and earth, which is expensive and of extremely advanced craftsmanship. At this point, Liu Hao paused slightly before continuing, if the emperor knew that this watch only has one piece. Heshen also instantly understood. He is certainly bold, but for Heshen, he also knows that the value that something can be realized in his own hands is completely different from the value that can be realized in the hands of the emperor. Although Heshen has developed now, it is still far from the time when power and opposition were later in power. Moreover, it has not expanded to the extent of moving the fortune monument to one's own home. Nowadays, Heshen is still very sensitive. Although Qianlong is old and his energy is not as strong as before, he is still the shrewd and capable emperor, and his methods are cruel enough. Although Heshen claimed to be able to understand the emperor's thoughts, as the saying goes, accompanying a ruler is like accompanying a tiger, so he naturally had to consider Qianlong's ideas. The emperor doesn't have it, you do. Aren't you seeking death? Heshen squinted his eyes, but in his heart, he calculated that giving this watch directly to the emperor would not be a problem for him to be promoted. Later, Heshen gave Liu Hao a meaningful glance. At a young age, I can already consider this aspect, and this guy is worth cultivating. Liu Hao is Liu Quan's nephew, and he is also versatile. In addition, with this exam, Heshen is the chief examiner, and Liu Hao can also be considered his own student. If possible, he can also be trusted as a confidant. You make sense. Heshen laughed and looked up and down at Liu Hao, unable to help but speak up, Liu Hao, you really make me look at you. It's all guided by adults. Liu Hao smiled and said, if it weren't for the guidance of adults, how could I possibly understand the key to it? Heshen chuckled and spoke again, do you have a residence in the capital? I'm currently staying at the Uli Inn. Liu Hao said. Heshen nodded slightly and continued, living in an inn is inevitably inconvenient. However, since that's the case, I will give you a house to live in for now. In a few days, it will be the palace examination, and you should study hard. If you get a score, I will have to give you some good words. Thank you very much, sir. Liu Hao stood up and saluted. He naturally knew that Heshen had completely treated him as his own person. Ordinary people can make Heshen pay and dream, right? Next, there will be a palace examination, which will be personally set by the emperor. Liu Hao narrowed his eyes slightly. If it was the palace examination, he wouldn't be very nervous. He had preserved all the memories of the original owner of his body. There is absolutely no problem with reciting poetry, speaking fluently, and writing beautiful 8-part essays. The saying goes that there are people in the court who are good officials. If you don't want to rebel and rely on Heshen to protect you, at least for the next 20 years, you will have smooth sailing. But 20 years later, Heshen disappeared. In 60 years, it will be the first Opium War. Liu Hao thinks it's better to rebel. The pigtail should have been cut off long ago. Now, I can also be considered as stepping into the officialdom of the Qing Dynasty. I also have to face a giant that is so powerful that it is almost suffocating. Chapter 6. Longyan Dayue. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. The courtyard that Heshen gave himself is located in the bustling area of the capital. In later generations, at least within the Second Ring Road, it is already very close to the Imperial Palace. Two-courtyard layout, covering an area of 570 square meters. The former residence faces north and south, with the first entrance consisting of a main gate, a main room, and an inverted building. The main gate is located in the southeast corner of the house, with 5 purlins on the gable roof, a tile roof and a ridge. The beams are decorated with Sioux-style paintings and red paint door panels. The inverted house is on the west side of the gate, 3 rooms wide and 5 purlins on the gable roof. If placed in future generations, this would be worth at least a few billion yuan. Heshen gifted this house to Liu Hao, obviously treating him as his own. Who doesn't know, Heshen is a penniless iron rooster, and the only person who can get money from Heshen is Emperor Qianlong. After Liu Hao moved in, he immediately caught the attention of countless people. Nowadays, Heshen was a prominent figure, favored minister, and high-ranking military minister around Qianlong. He even gave a mansion to Liu Hao, which inevitably led to speculation about Liu Hao's identity. Quickly, Liu Hao's identity was inquired about. Jinke Huiyuan. Unexpectedly, Liu Hao had already defected to Heshen. It was even more unexpected that Heshen held such high regard for Liu Hao. Now that I have joined Heshen, I will inevitably be promoted to higher ranks in the future. In the court, Ague, Wang Jie, Ji Xiaolan, Lu Yong and others naturally frowned. Heshen's hand was extended too long and had already infiltrated into the imperial examination. In the future, when the court selects officials, Heshen can naturally make a lot of money from top to bottom. For these court officials, naturally, they cannot help but worry. However, at this moment, Liu Hao was calm and composed. It doesn't matter whether you are with the party or not. Your ultimate goal is to push it to this damn Qing dynasty. Now, what you need to consider is what kind of official you want to obtain. We cannot do without real power, we must have real power, and we must also establish sufficient interest exchanges with Heshen. Qianlong only had a lifespan of over 20 years. When Qianlong died, Jiaqing was about to take down Heshen. At that time, no matter how hard he struggled, he could not resist. The best way was to take advantage of these 20 years to rapidly develop and grow. Contrary to him, damn it. Young master, and adults really value you. You will also be able to achieve great success in the future. What kind of official can the emperor give you? Standing beside Liu Hao was a servant dressed up, named Sun He, who was also his own servant. This Sun He is like Liu Quan following Heshen, taking care of his own food, drink, and daily life. He is definitely a trustworthy person. I don't know, it all depends on the palace examination, and how much strength we and adults can put in. Liu Hao just smiled lightly and said nonchalantly, however, this official should be indispensable. In fact, Liu Hao really wants to personally give the watch to the emperor. However, just thinking about it, it's not easy to get around the matter of Heshen. It's not worth it to please Qianlong and offend Heshen. Even if Emperor Qianlong appreciated himself and Heshen stumbled upon him, could he still have good fruits to eat? Let Heshen handle things more happily. One advantage of Heshen is that once he takes the money, he will handle things for you. Moreover, it is evident that Heshen now regards himself as his confidant. In the future, this benefit will also be indispensable. Zhengda Guangming Hall. Since the early dynasty, Qianlong enjoyed the 3 cheers of civil and military officials, and then various rainbow farts, which allowed him to leisurely descend to the next dynasty. Nowadays, Qianlong was no longer young, and his energy was not as strong as before. In the past, reading memorials allowed him to concentrate tirelessly, but now he only has 1 or 2 hours a year to maintain this high-intensity work. The remaining time is either aimless or full of various activities. Compared to youth and middle age, in the later years of Qianlong's reign, hedonism was more prevalent. This short period of 20 years also marked the sharp decline of the entire Qing dynasty. Your Majesty. A eunuch approached Qianlong's side and politely said, "We're here." Qianlong raised his eyes slightly and casually threw the fish roe into the pond before saying, "Let him in." Heshen arrived at the Imperial garden and immediately knelt down to bow. Qianlong raised his eyes slightly and glanced lightly at Heshen before speaking up, "Heshen, are you here?" Heshen immediately humbly spoke up, "Heshen pays his respects to the emperor." "Long live my emperor! Long live! Heshen, why are you here to find me?" Qianlong summoned Heshen to sit down next to him and casually asked the eunuch to bring a chair. "Long live, yesterday the servant discovered a treasure and today he specially gave it to the emperor." Heshen smiled and casually took out the box wrapped in Patek Philippe. "Oh." Qianlong suddenly became interested, and as he entered old age, he became more fond of various rare treasures. Seeing the box sent by Heshen, Qianlong almost couldn't wait to open it. Seeing the peaceful Patek Philippe lying in the box, Qianlong took a deep breath. The exquisite Patek Philippe in the box naturally aroused Qianlong's great interest. In his later years, Qianlong's favorite treasures were clocks and watches. In the 58th year of the Qianlong reign, the people of the Eagle Kingdom paid their respects to Qianlong and brought various rare treasures. The powerful firearm was thrown aside by Qianlong, but he couldn't let go of the clock. At this moment, when he saw this Patek Philippe, Qianlong couldn't put it down. Who on earth made this? How could the clock be made so small? Qianlong's face showed a curious expression. "Heshen, where did you get it from?" Returning to the emperor, "This is what I got from the Westerners. It's just one piece, and they don't know how much effort they put into it." Heshen respectfully said, "Long live, why don't you take it up and take a look?" "Oh." Qianlong became interested and couldn't help but ask, "How do you bring it with you?" Heshen was guided by Liu Hao last night, and at this moment, wearing it on Qianlong's wrist is naturally an easy task. "Not bad." Qianlong's face showed a smile. "What a great object, Heshen. You really surprised me. Being able to please the master is already a great blessing for me." Heshen respectfully spoke up, "Long live, how about it?" Qianlong waved his wrist, naturally becoming more and more fond as he looked at it. He nodded and said, "Not bad, Heshen, you have made great contributions and deserve a reward." "Slave, thank you for the emperor's grace." Heshen immediately fell to the ground, his deep excitement imaginable. Chapter 7. Online Teaching by Zhu Gu and Shen. You are listening at novelfull.audio. If you want to be a versatile and skilled person, it should be Heshen. Heshen had already completely flattered Qianlong, and even more so, he fell in love with him, making Qianlong increasingly dependent on Heshen in his later years. Soon, he was rewarded as the Chief Grand Secretary of the Cabinet and the Minister of Military Affairs. Unusual promotion. Originally, Heshen's status was already highly respected, but Qianlong once again elevated Heshen's political status. In this way, there are naturally countless statements from Qinglu, believing that Heshen is not young enough to take on important responsibilities. However, Emperor Qianlong seemed determined to appoint Heshen as the Chief Minister of the Cabinet and the Chief Minister of Military Affairs. Although Qianlong was getting older, he still remained autocratic. With a single command. In an instant, Heshen's status rose once again. In the 45th year of the Qianlong reign, Heshen was only 30 years old. A high-ranking official. Hafu, ha ha ha. The current Heshen can be considered full of ambition, with Qianlong relying heavily on him. Now that he is donating his own treasures, his identity and status are also improving and increasing. Heshen seemed to see the supreme throne of power waving towards him. In the court, it can be considered as one person below 10,000 people above 10,000. In both the court and the opposition, Heshen cultivated his followers. If it were Qianlong or Young, Heshen would definitely not have done so, but after all, Qianlong was already old and his energy was not as strong as before. Master, Liu Hao is here. Just as Heshen was pondering, the butler Liu Quan came to Heshen's face. Let him in. Heshen waved his hand. Later, Liu Hao walked in and said, I've seen you before, Lord. Liu Hao, you're here, come, sit. At this moment, Heshen's mood was extremely good. Liu Quan, hurry up and serve Liu Hao tea. How dare Uncle Lao do it? Liu Hao glanced at Liu Quan, and though he roused in his heart, a polite smile appeared on his face. Where, Liu Hao, the watch you sent us, but it's just right for our master to get promoted and rich, and pour you tea. Liu Quan happily poured a cup of tea for Liu Hao. Heshen narrowed his eyes slightly and then slowly spoke, Liu Hao, how have you been reading these days? Lord Huiha. Liu Hao paused slightly before speaking in exchange, preparing for the palace examination. You read the book well, but you can't be foolish either. Heshen spoke calmly, I called you over today, and there is still one thing I want to tell you. This palace examination is very important. You have to figure it out carefully. Come and take a look. After reading it, remember to burn it. As he spoke, Heshen handed Liu Hao a folded white paper. Opening it up, Liu Hao couldn't help but tremble all over. This is actually a palace examination question. The palace examination only tests questioning. Simply put, it means that the court makes a request to you and you are responsible for answering it. The candidate enters at dawn and undergoes rituals such as roll calling, unrolling, praising and bowing, and then presents a proposal. Formulating a strategy question, using a current affairs strategy in the early Qing Dynasty, with a length of 200 to 300 words, inquiring about one or two matters. After Kangxi, the questions lasted for 500 to 600 words, or even about 1,000 words. In the 26th year of the Qianlong reign, 1761, the title was changed to 4 lines circled out of the 8 secret discussions of the reading minister. There is no limit to the length of a policy article, usually around 2,000 words. There are certain formatting and word count restrictions for the starting, ending, and middle writing. Special emphasis is placed on writing, which must be in traditional Chinese, such as the courtyard style or pavilion style. The characters should be square, round, black, and large in size. From a certain perspective, calligraphy is often more important than writing. The question that Emperor Qianlong was going to ask now was actually solved by Heshen himself. Damn it, how powerful is this guy really? Liu Hao, if you are not an official in the court, you probably don't know how to answer. I want to give you some guidance. Heshen put down his teacup and slowly spoke. Please give me your advice. Liu Hao quickly stood up. Although the guy in front of him was the most corrupt official in the world, Liu Hao understood that Heshen's ability was also top-notch. Subsequently, the two entered the study. Although Heshen did not come from the Imperial examination system, he had a first-class familiarity with the officialdom of the Qing Dynasty. Heshen taught Liu Hao some tricks on strategy theory, which were a summary of Heshen's many years of official career. Seeing that Liu Hao has finished writing the first game theory, Heshen just glanced at him and slowly spoke up, Liu Hao, your strategy theory often deviates from the main path, just like this question. How to place refugees. You write about developing industry and commerce, using work as a means of relief, adopting refugees, or letting refugees cultivate mines. Whether this measure is effective or not will not be said for now, but if this answer is given to the examiners, they will definitely be defeated. The examiners are all Hongru doctors, and they need to cater to their taste in order to pass the level. Liu Hao was slightly surprised and couldn't help but speak up, so how should I answer? Heshen smiled and spoke slowly, if I were to answer, would definitely answer the question this way. We should strengthen the education of the people in Jiaohua. It should be noted that the Qing Dynasty will never add taxes, and refugees, who know the sacred grace, must bury their heads in cultivating wasteland. In this way, the country will be peaceful and the people will be in good weather. Among them, how to place refugees is not important, what is important is education. Only in this way can the reading officials be satisfied. As for how to place refugees and so on, it is only a minor matter. If we talk too much about it, it will be annoying. Liu Hao must remember that this is not only a reading official, but also a reading official. Your Majesty, it is also highly valued. Liu Hao was somewhat stunned. If the Qing dynasty does not perish, it is only natural that it is not allowed. However, it seems that the imperial examination is not as easy as he imagined. However, he also inevitably has some roast in his heart. He came from time to time and naturally values pragmatism. He requires a hammer to educate and turn all refugees into workers, liberating and developing productive forces. With sufficient resources, he knows etiquette. At that time, they will naturally know what etiquette is. However, he also understood that when he traveled through time, he had to abide by the rules of this era. Heshen is imparting his own experience to himself, so that he can strive for sufficient benefits when the time comes. A child can be taught. Heshen smiled and spoke lightly, if I were to talk about this 8-part essay, I would definitely not be as good as you. However, I know much more about this strategy theory and understanding the thoughts of Wan Sui than you do. It's really not easy to get into his position as the world's largest corrupt official. Liu Hao also admired Heshen quite a bit, and fortunately, he inherited the memory of the original owner of his body. Otherwise, it would have been even more difficult to write this 8-part essay. May I ask for the flowers and reviews? These data are very important during the new book period. This book is a slow-paced one, and there will be some groundwork. Of course, it will definitely be enjoyable, and YY is also reasonable and not too extreme. Here, I beg for the data, hoping to give the author some encouragement. Your support is the author's motivation to write the book. Chapter 8. Palace Examination Content. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Liu Hao couldn't help but smile bitterly and said, if I hadn't given you guidance, I'm afraid I would have suffered a big loss in the palace examination too. However, Heshen smiled and said, your game theory has such insight, which is not bad. Remember, the 8-legged essay emphasizes writing and coherence, and the 8-legged essay pattern is the most restrictive. Therefore, how to create a colorful article in this limited space that can secretly conform to the teachings of sages is success. The most important thing in game theory is to first establish the main idea, and then unfold the narrative around it, with clear organization. Therefore, game theory is much easier than the 8-legged essay. However, most scholars in the world value the 8-legged essay, and there are not many who hunt for and discuss it. On the contrary, every time they choose a scholar, there are countless good articles in the 8-legged essay. Counting, but there is a lack of innovative strategic papers that can make people feel refreshed. Liu Hao could only smile bitterly and continue writing strategy theory. Another game theory was presented to Heshen. After reading it, Heshen said, not bad, not bad. This time, there has been more progress compared to the previous time, with a clear and systematic approach, and I have also gained a deep understanding of the psychology of the examiners. However, there are countless such policy papers in the palace examination, but anyone with guidance can produce such a policy paper. Without novelty, it is difficult to stand out. Liu Hao, on the other hand, was stunned and looked at Heshen, saying, I just said that I can't seek novelty and must cater to the taste of the officials who read books. Now you're teaching me how to seek novelty, right? Heshen spoke lightly and said, this is the difficulty of game theory. It requires both the appetite of the reader and novelty. There is a degree here that must be grasped. If it is too new, it will inevitably make people feel rebellious, but if it is old and lacks novelty, it is difficult to make people's eyes shine. Sleeping trough. Liu Hao no longer knows what to say. He felt that he couldn't underestimate the ancients, especially since the Qing Dynasty was almost the pinnacle of monarchy, and in the hands of Emperor Qianlong, it was a fighter jet at its peak. Heshen was able to make it to this point at this time, and he did have his own outstanding qualities. For a moment, Liu Hao also had to muster up a spirit of 120,000. To be honest, if anyone were to be trained by Heshen like this, I'm afraid I would be extremely grateful. However, for Liu Hao, this is just a stepping stone for himself. In fact, with a teacher like Heshen, Liu Hao quickly became proficient in game theory, which is also his advantage and strength. After all, as a person of 2 generations, he has a deeper understanding of problems, stands higher than others, and sees far. However, for those candidates from poor families, writing 8-legged essays is relatively easy for them. As long as they have a few books and study them at home every day, as long as they have high talent, good qualifications, and are willing to work hard, it is not difficult to write colorful 8-legged essays. But game theory is not something that you can write without listening to the outside world and reading only the books of sages. Moreover, they have no guidance, and many problems are difficult to avoid. This group of people will definitely find it difficult to stand out. And Liu Hao's opponents are mainly the children of officials in aristocratic families, who often have a deep background, guidance from elders in the family, and naturally have a vision that is not comparable to that of humble children, with obvious advantages. Although Heshen was able to tamper with the imperial examination, it was very difficult for him to do so in the palace examination. After all, if he really tampered under the emperor's watchful eye, even if Qianlong favored Heshen, he would have chopped him up. For several consecutive days, Heshen would call Liu Hao to his mansion every day to teach him his experience. In addition, he also prepared a series of strategic essays for Liu Hao. In addition, there were also some memorials from the court before. These types of essays were standard strategic essays, and as long as some of the words were modified, they became a typical model essay. Liu Hao has to admit that he is really awesome with corrupt officials. No wonder he became the first corrupt official of the Qing Dynasty. Judging solely from his attitude, this guy has already had a very thorough understanding of the emperor's thoughts. In the blink of an eye, the palace examination was getting closer and closer. The 8 selected examiners entered the palace on April 14th, and for the next 3 days, they would stay in the palace without any contact with anyone. In these 3 days, they will negotiate together to come up with exam questions, which will be submitted to the emperor for approval. However, in general, once the 8 examiners submit the exam questions, the palace will definitely approve them, and there is no reason for them to fail. However, these 8 examiners are mostly from Heshen, so the questions they can answer are basically within Heshen's expectations. Refugees. Heart-nourishing haul. Qianlong looked at the test question, but couldn't help frowning. The question was about the issue of refugees. Currently, there were more and more refugees in the Qing Dynasty, and the court had no land to settle them, which caused a lot of trouble. On the one hand, the children of the 8 banners are a group of, not scholars, not farmers, not workers, not merchants, not soldiers, not the people, who only know how to pursue the beauty of appearance and appearance as playboy and scoundrel. The children of the 8 banners not only cannot become the pillars of the country, but in reality, they have become a group parasite of the country and a social worm. They pursue luxury and wait for subsidies. In the past, they practiced with knives every day, but now they are idle every day. They either carry cages and birds, raise flowers and smoke, brag in tea houses, or flirt with girls in song and theater stages. Most of them have even contracted opium smoke, not to mention killing enemies for the country. Even their livelihood is a problem, and their lives are ruined by playing with it. In addition, they occupied too much land and created a large number of refugees. After the mid-Qing Dynasty, population expansion led to a serious shortage of arable land. In the 51st year of the Kangxi reign, 1712, Emperor Kangxi issued an edict stating, after a long period of peace and prosperity, the number of people born will increase day by day. After the birth of household registration, there is no need to pay an additional ding qian, which is based on the current year's ding number as the fixed amount, and this is the order. This policy was an important factor in the rapid population growth of the Qing dynasty. By the Opium War, the population had already reached 400 million, and the issue of the ratio between population and land became the trigger for the refugee problem. The pressure of population on land was obvious, as even the population in remote areas was in a saturated state. The refugees were freed from this massive surplus population, and the Qing government was helpless in the face of this problem, letting it go. At that time, the social environment was simply unable to provide them with a livelihood, and they could not engage in any industry. People who were not scholars, farmers, workers, or merchants would be 10 to 5 to 6. The massive outflow of refugees seriously affects social security, generally leading to the emptiness of villages and economic decline. This led to a shortage of money, reduced taxes, empty national treasury, and a decline in national strength for the Qing government from the central to local levels. The inability to save these low-income people who have lost their means of livelihood, and the government's inaction has led to the expansion of the refugee population, thus creating a vicious cycle. The refugees are helpless and have to survive on their own, so they easily form cliques and join other social organizations. Society groups in various regions became gathering places for refugees, such as the Tiandihui in the southern provinces and Nianzi in the north, which later became the rebel forces against the Qing dynasty. During the reign of Emperor Qianlong, refugees had actually begun to become somewhat severe. The White Lotus uprising that emerged in the late Qianlong period directly led to the decline of the Qing dynasty. At this moment, there has been a lot of debate in the court over the issue of these refugees. It is still appropriate to propose this topic now. Just write about this refugee. Qianlong nodded slightly. Chapter 9. Enter the Forbidden City. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On April 19, it was dark clouds blocking the sun, and rainstorm was magnificent. It hasn't rained like this for a long time in the capital, so the rainstorm is falling steadily, which makes people feel uncomfortable. Liu Hao took a deep breath and knew that he was going to see Qianlong today, the perfect old man and the emperor with the most gossip. Although it was a rainstorm today, the palace examination was not held in the open air after all, and it didn't matter. Liu Hao got up early in the morning, only to see lightning and thunder. Young master, today's college entrance examination is all up to you. Our family will also produce a top scorer in the future. While Liu Hao was still stretching his muscles, he heard a humble smile on his servant Sun He's face beside him. Difficult. Liu Hao took a deep breath. Although during this period, Heshen has been covering up for himself, placing bets on his own problems, and even personally solving them, Liu Hao also understands that the final decision is not in Heshen, but in Qianlong. Heshen was able to accurately grasp Qianlong's temperament and liking, but there were still significant differences in the actual operation of the knife. The rainstorm is pouring. Just as Liu Hao was leaving, he saw that Liu Quan had already arrived ahead of schedule. Liu Quan was still driving a carriage and said, "Liu Hao, today you are going to the palace for the Imperial examination. I have already prepared a carriage for you and asked me to prepare it for you. You just came to the capital. You are not familiar with the place of life, and I have reminded you to enter the palace and face the Holy Spirit. You must not lose your dignity. Be considerate to adults." Liu Hao smiled and then leaned over slightly. "Thank you, uncle." Although it was a storm, the carriage was relatively warm inside, and there was even a heater inside. Entering the Forbidden City. What I saw was a sudden storm, and under the thunder and lightning, one by one was drenched in the figure of drowned chickens. These were all tribute students of the Jinshi Academy, who were about to showcase their talents in front of Emperor Qianlong. Winners, soar to the sky. Although the rainstorm poured, coupled with the rustling cold wind, the cold rain made them shiver, but it did not stop their enthusiasm. Seeing this scene, Liu Hao's face showed no unnecessary emotional changes. At the noon gate, many candidates were already waiting, but no eunuch came to announce the order, so many honest candidates had to wait outside in raincoats. Liu Hao lifted the curtain to get off the car. However, Liu Quan stopped him and squinted his eyes for a moment before saying, "Hao, just stay in the car. There are no rules in our Qing Dynasty that prohibit taking a bus at the noon gate. Besides, if these candidates don't understand, you don't need to come out." Liu Hao was slightly taken aback, thinking about it. After all, those candidates had just arrived in the Forbidden City for the first time, and they dared not sit in the sedan chair for fear of offending the rules. Although the Qing Dynasty had many rules, it was normal for them to enter and exit the Meridian Gate by car. Heshen must have known the rules inside. Since Heshen has arranged everything, Liu Hao naturally won't talk too much nonsense. Many candidates, on the other hand, frowned when they saw that Liu Hao had never gotten off the carriage at all. Who is this person? This person's name is Liu Hao. It is said that he won the Imperial examination and is a disciple of Heshen. Heshen's disciple, humph. There was a disdainful voice in the person's nasal cavity, clearly showing extreme disdain for Liu Hao. Although Heshen is now in a state of power and opposition, after all, he is not yet in his prime. He has only been promoted for 1 or 2 years and has not yet had his own followers. If not, Heshen could not have been extremely accommodating to Liu Hao, even personally taking notes and reviewing to help Liu Hao understand Qianlong's thoughts. In the end, Heshen is only around 30 years old and has no connections in the court. He needs to cultivate his own followers. Throughout his life, Emperor Qianlong hated party strife the most, suppressing Ertai and Zhang Tingyu. Unfortunately, in his later years, he still cultivated a harmonious party. Of course, Qianlong still had the means to suppress the party's strength, which was not as strong. It also made it very easy for Jia Qing to clean up Heshen. So he waited in the car for a moment, and finally a eunuch rushed over in the rain. He arrived at the doorway, holding an edict in his hand and shouting, "Please allow the Gongxing to enter the Hall of Supreme Harmony. It is raining heavily today, and your majesty cannot bear the Gongxing to enter the palace in the rain." He allows the Gongxing to take a carriage and sedan chair in the palace. These tribute students have long been drenched in soup. Upon hearing the decree, they were immediately grateful and said, "Your majesty is wise." Then one by one, they sat back in their own sedan chairs. However, Liu Hao wanted to laugh in his heart. It was just a small gesture to win people's hearts, expressing the emperor's love for talent. You were all so grateful that tears welled up in your eyes. Qianlong, a notorious thief, almost destroyed Chinese civilization, established a literary prison, controlled his thoughts, cut off trade, and in his later years, he opened the door to corruption, marking the beginning of the decline of the Qing Dynasty from prosperity to decline. This is also the late Qianlong period, where Liu Hao was not as excited as he was in middle age and engaged in literary inquisitions every day. Otherwise, even if there was a system, the only thing Liu Hao could do was to be meticulous. At this point, Liu Hao's carriage had already advanced to the entrance, but Liu Quan was not allowed to enter the palace. There were eunuchs inside who took his task and drove Liu Hao's carriage to the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Many candidates are feeling nervous and uneasy, but Liu Hao's interest is still good, even admiring the Forbidden City under the rain. This is not his first time here. He also wandered around the Forbidden City in his previous life. At this moment, in the rain curtain, the Forbidden City is spotless, and a thin mist rises in the air. There is a hint of a fairyland on earth. However, Liu Hao didn't have much feeling. This kind of scene is just a small joke. In his past life, Liu Hao also liked to travel mountains and rivers, and he has long been accustomed to it. Other candidates don't think so either. How many people can follow them into the Forbidden City after passing the palace examination in their lifetime? In the Hall of Supreme Harmony, 8 examiners had been waiting for a long time, and before Emperor Qianlong appeared, the examiners stood behind the desk documents. There were already hundreds of desk documents placed in the hall, with pens, ink, paper, inkstones, and brewed tea on top. Around them, dozens of eunuchs stood with their breath held. Liu Hao was already very familiar with the rules of this era. He stepped forward and bowed to the reading officials, saying, "Student Liu Hao, I have met all the adults." The 8 examiners nodded with a hint of seriousness and coldness on their faces. Even if they accepted his gift, they did not talk to him. On the other hand, a eunuch beside them loudly said, "Gongxing Liu Hao, please give me the first seat in the Jia platoon." Chapter 10. The Palace Examination begins. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. The Palace Examination begins. The rules of the palace examination were similar to what Liu Hao had inquired about earlier. These examiners were not facing him with such a cold face because they had a grudge against him, but because they deliberately showed the dignity of the examiners. The 8 examiners did not have a leader. In theory, they were all the examiners of the emperor. The leader should be the emperor, but according to the rules, seniority should also be considered. Whoever has higher qualifications will naturally preside over the initial trial. 2 out of the 8 officials who read books have similar ranks, one is a minister of the Ministry of Rites and the other is a scholar of the Hanlin Academy. The minister of the Ministry of Rites has a high rank, and although the Hanlin Academy is noble, the scholar is only of the 5th rank. However, in the Qing Dynasty, qualifications were not calculated in this way. The scholars of the Hanlin Academy were in charge of drafting imperial edicts and issuing decrees, which was equivalent to the secretariat of the emperor. Most of the officials in it were extremely prestigious, and they were the reserves of the Minister of Military Affairs, half of whom were in charge of military affairs. Everyone present had a very different identity, and they were all ministers of the Qianlong dynasty. After Qianlong grew old, this group of people were also about the same age. After Heshen, who was young and strong, entered the military aircraft department and began to cultivate his own followers, he is now respected by the military aircraft. One of the elderly people, named Yang Shi. His gaze seemed to sweep over Liu Hao, but now he is still very young, only 18 years old. If it had been more than a decade ago, he would definitely have praised Liu Hao, but now Liu Hao defected to Heshen. And Heshen entered the court in the form of flattery. Although he had not yet become the largest corrupt official in the Qing dynasty, this trend was getting faster and faster. Yang Shi narrowed his gaze and then spoke faintly, "The students will take the high school entrance exam. Congratulations. Today is the palace entrance exam. I can't help but say a few more words. Let's first talk about the exam regulations. In fact, the palace examination is relatively the most relaxed compared to other exams, with fewer rules and no soldiers searching. There is no tense atmosphere at all, but rather a gathering of scholars or listening to lectures in the Mingluan Hall of the Imperial Academy. Yang Shi began to talk about some rules, but later he even found himself bored. He smiled slightly and said, "I won't say much, let's start the exam now. Students, prepare your writing." The tribute students sitting behind the desk all went to the pen holders to pick up their pens. They wanted to sharpen the ink, but now the ink was already sharpened. So they picked up their pens and spread out the paper, one by one, as if they were ready to start writing at any time. In fact, this is just pretending. Even if a question is asked, most people don't start writing so quickly. Everyone just shows a deliberate attitude to add a good impression to the examiners. Not long after, a eunuch took a sacred edict and recited it. The imperial examination question is the way to pacify the refugees, and it is also said. I have been in the imperial examination for 40.5 years and have never missed the governance of the sages. However, the refugees are everywhere. The title of the game theory question often ranges from 500 to 1000 words, but no matter how many words there are, it is just empty talk. The most important thing is which sentence is the way to appease the refugees. This is the serious answer. In other words, the central question of this game theory is to ask candidates to write a game theory to appease the refugees. After listening to the question, some students frowned and showed a happy expression, while others had a bitter melon-like expression on their faces and didn't know how to start writing. They may have heard a little about refugees, but there was no real pain. Who is eating enough to keep pondering this? What is a refugee, a refugee? Liu Hao narrowed his eyes slightly. In fact, he had already had a plan in mind. The exam questions have already been answered, and even Heshen taught him how to accurately grasp Qianlong's thoughts, so that Liu Hao could fully grasp Qianlong's thoughts. Liu Hao pondered for a moment before starting to write. In fact, at the end, it's about grasping Qianlong's thoughts. Great achievement, boasting of being a perfect old man, this refugee cannot be said to be particularly serious. In the prosperous era of our emperor, where did the refugee come from? It's just a disease of scabies and moss. The later the Qianlong reign, the more he liked to isolate himself, and his favorite thing was to report good news without worrying. So, how to write this game theory must be carefully considered. What I ultimately please is not these officials, but Qianlong. The key is how to follow Qianlong's thoughts to answer questions. Although the exam questions he brought were for refugees, Liu Hao also listened to all the content of the Imperial Edict. The Imperial Edict mentions the Qing Emperor Kangxi at least 3 times. Throughout history, the most revered figure by Emperor Qianlong was also Emperor Kangxi of the Qing Dynasty. So we need to start writing from Kangxi in an instant. Liu Hao had his own problem-solving approach. In fact, if we set aside prejudices against braids, what Liu Hao admires the most is actually Yongzheng. With the memories of his past life and the cultivation of Heshen, Liu Hao quickly wrote an article. This type of article should not be full of flowers, but must hit every key point. Firstly, in the 51st year of the Kangxi reign, Emperor Kangxi played a big card. Never add taxes. The general idea is that the tax collection standards of the Qing Dynasty were based on the tax amount of the 51st year of the Kangxi reign, and no additional taxes were allowed regardless of the increase in population. With this beginning, Liu Hao followed suit and wrote down what kind of benevolent government it was, and how our Emperor Xingming would carry it out to the end. Even if there are refugees, it is just a disease of scabies and moss. With the method of education, nature can solve this problem. In this way, the people will return to their hearts and the world will be at peace. The prosperous era of the Qing Dynasty will never waver. However, Liu Hao himself did not believe this statement. While writing, Liu Hao's heart is constantly roast that the Qing Dynasty will not perish. In fact, never adding taxes was indeed very effective, which led to the continuous increase of the Qing Dynasty's population, management costs, and the increasing size of the national machinery. However, Qianlong wanted to make his internal affairs office prosperous, so he made every effort to increase the tax revenue. Blatantly increasing regular taxes is clearly contrary to ancestral teachings, but there are ways to do so. By adding new types of taxes. In this context, various and bizarre types of taxes have emerged one after another. For example, there is a name called floating collection, which refers to the essential expenses incurred during the collection, storage, transportation, and storage of the main imperial grain. The Qing dynasty stipulated that this expenditure should be converted into the imperial grain, and when the people pay 1 stone of imperial grain, it can only be converted into 8 dough, which increases the burden by 20% at once. This proportion is relatively light, and in many places during the late Qing dynasty, the floating collection quota even exceeded the normal amount. In addition to floating collection and fire consumption, the Qing dynasty also successively levied various types of taxes such as lijian and mining taxes. Overall, the never adding taxes policy of the Qing dynasty sounded quite shocking, but it was actually a gimmick with a lot of thunder, rain, and small dots, which caught the attention of the Qing emperor. The burden on the people not only did not diminish in the slightest, but also became increasingly heavy. The emergence of peasant uprisings was a natural occurrence. Starting from the late Qianlong period, the Qing dynasty entered a period of high incidence of peasant uprisings, including the White Lotus Rebellion, Qianli Rebellion, Taiping Rebellion, and Nian Rebellion, which were continuous and numerous in number and scale, almost setting a record in ancient history.